Welcome to Desperately Seeking the 80s. I am Meg.
And I'm Jessica. And Meg and I have been friends since 1982. We got through middle school and high school together here in New York City, where we still live.
And where we podcast about New York City in the 80s. I do Ripped from the Headlines.
And I do pop culture.
So, Jessica.
Oh, God.
How was your day today?
Surreal and sad. And I woke up and cried today. Should we say what date it is?
Yeah, we are recording on November 6th.
2024. And we were just talking about how these election results are very difficult for us. And, you know, I was thinking, I'm sorry to even, I know you're going to say something. I was reading something like a year ago about how someone lost half of their people on their TikTok because they mentioned their political leaning. But I don't think that ours is mysterious to anyone who listens to us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry if you like him or Project 2025 or anything like that, you probably don't like us. I'm not ashamed to say that.
I think it's good that we've been calling him Voldemort all this time, because what I'm noticing is that neither one of us can bring ourselves to say his name.
No, I can't.
No. So, yeah, it's a weird day.
It's a weird day. You know, I have been in touch with a few people who I didn't know. I mean, it's hard to talk. Like, sometimes it's like, maybe people don't want to hear from people. And a text can be read in different ways and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And maybe you just don't want to talk about it. Maybe you want to go in a hole. I don't know. But I have had some contact with people over the course of the day, and I haven't seen a light at the end of the tunnel or anything like that, but I have seen community. At least there's that. I can say that at the end of this crazy, weird, very unsettling day.
I got a text from presumably Chuck Schumer's office. I was going to look it up after our podcasting to sign a petition so that
I got that too.
You got that? Okay, so So what is it? It's called like no one's a king, something like that, and that he could not avoid his criminal charges. But
good luck.
Yeah,
Chuck.
Good luck, Chuck. That's not going to happen.
But if that's what people need to feel like they can move forward, action, people want action items. All right. Okay. I'll sign a petition.
Yeah. If it makes Chuck Schumer feel better, I'm happy to do it.
So forgive me if I'm a bit low energy. I feel like I'm in somewhat of a fugue state, but
as am I.
I do have a story to tell you today, Jessica. We are soldiering forth.
Yes.
Yay.
Look at us. We are responsible adult women
who do the things that we say we're going to do. All right. My engagement question is, we've talked about how we were both kind of morbid kids when we were little.
Yes. I think kind of
loved Edward Gorey, which I
and
amazing.
headstones. I was like really into cemeteries. Also, when El Greco's paintings of Jesus and his long green feet, remember that?
Yes,
so
yes.
Very into the dead.
I was too.
I am not surprised even a shred.
And apparently one of the first things I ever said, first full sentences I ever said, and then continued to say it often, was, how did he die?
Oh my God, I love you so much. So you're so consistent. Look at you.
I know.
Look at you. You have not changed since your first sentence.
And the story I'm going to tell today, I vaguely recall when this happened. And I remember being so curious about it.
Okay.
And this, I will give a trigger warning. I don't always, but this is about a suicide.
I think that was very kind of you to share, particularly today. But you had an engagement question for me.
That was my engagement. Oh, what were your? Oh no, it was an engagement question for me. Apparently.
Okay.
But
I support that.
Where's the question? The question is, what were your first words? Do you remember?
No, but I have my first memory.
Okay.
Unsurprisingly, it involves my brother. But we shared a room and he had a big boy bed and I was in a crib and our heads were pointed in the same direction. And so my first memory is waving at John and him waving back to me while we were
Oh my
tucked in.
God, what cutie patooties.
Yes, it was super
You
adorbs.
guys.
I know. We love each other. Yeah. So I think that my first word was, hi, John.
Oh, oh.
I called him Joe. So there you go.
My sources are New York Times, Vanity Fair, Facebook.
Nice.
On the afternoon of Saturday, February 15th, 1986, 29-year-old Joseph Duell performed in George Balanchine's Symphony in C at the New York City Ballet. He was a dedicated member of the ballet, having moved to New York to study with Balanchine at SAB when he was 15, and had steadily risen through the ranks. Later, in the early evening of the 15th, he saw his older brother, Daniel. Daniel and most of Joe's friends and fellow dancers knew he had been feeling terribly overstrung, was the phrase they used, in the last couple of weeks. He had spoken about being depressed and was under the care of a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And oddly, this came up in Facebook, and I do not know if it's true, but he was part of a group of people who saw a psychic. They all shared the same psychic who they used for emotional support, which is just sort of interesting. And I feel rather 80s.
I feel like that was just taking Psychic Friends Network into like real life.
But I do remember.
I'm agreeing with you.
Okay.
I'm saying that, yes, like psychics and like all of that stuff, like it was
But
so
there
popular.
were people, I mean, I remember not my parents, but my parents' friends had friends who had a psychic that they went to regularly, like you would talk about going to a therapist, or like you would talk about, I don't know, like going, having a weekly appointment. You would have your appointment with your psychic. I feel like that was more a thing then.
I'm going to blow your mind for like 3 seconds.
Yes.
That there's a woman I know who is very much chasing love at the moment. She's not a close friend, but I know her, and she texts me these like great American novels of what's going on with her. Everything is, I'm going to the psychic. And she tells me the psychic, like it is not only the therapist, but like the check-in for her own reality.
Okay. It was February in New York City.
Bleak.
Yeah, February in New York City can be rough.
Yes.
Daniel knew Joe was depressed, the brother, but he didn't notice anything alarming. Joe then went to rehearsal for Who Cares?, a ballet choreographed by Balanchine to a set of Gershwin songs and described as fun, flirty, romantic, jazzy. I put that in because it's called Who Cares? I'm like, what was the mood of this piece?
It seems confounding.
But apparently it was more like
it's like, who cares? Like, everything's great. Everything. I don't care. Everything.
Oh, it'll be fine.
Whoop-de-doo.
A notoriously hard worker, he danced his variation full out again and again, asking the room each time, was it better? After the rehearsal, he headed home to his apartment on West 77th, and the next morning at 10 a.m., he threw himself naked from his 5th floor window.
Oh, God.
And what I had remembered from my childhood was the papers referring to it as his swan song.
Oh, yeah.
Because he dove.
Wait, remind me, I'm so sorry. What year is this?
1986.
Okay.
He left no note. His community was shattered. Joe was particularly respected and loved. In a profession known for its egos, he had made it his mission to be the perfect partner, He fashioned a workout that strengthened his thighs and biceps so he could best support the ballerinas. He'd grown up in Dayton, Ohio, had started dancing when he was 7, and was recruited by the School of American Ballet at 15, where he was a full-time scholarship student. He came from a large, strict, religious, yet musical family, and this also came up on the Facebook page. Which every time I refer to the Facebook page, these are people who wrote in, and so this might just be rumor, you know? So I put a caveat around it. But somebody said that his father was known for being, both of his parents, but especially his father, incredibly strict and absolutely favored the boys over the girls, like that kind of setup in their home. His older brother, Daniel, was already in the New York City Ballet Corps. When he came to New York. And Joe joined 3 years later in 1975. He became a soloist in 1980 and a principal in 1984. So rising through the ranks rather steadily. He had natural talent, but elevations and pirouettes did not come easily for him. So he made up for that in effort. Even amongst dancers working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, his work ethic stood out. He didn't drink or smoke and went to bed early and was known for making huge, healthy salads for his friends to share in Cheap's Meadow. And Balanchine had great affection for him. Joe was a thinker. When Balanchine was in the hospital in the fall of 1982, Joe went to visit him, and they talked about ballet. Joe wanted to know why the fifth position in ballet was so central to classical technique. And Balanchine urged him, "You know, I wouldn't worry. Just live." But that's not how Joe's brain worked. He was an intense and curious and committed artist. When he first arrived in New York, he ran into another kid from Dayton who was studying piano at Juilliard.
Dayton.
I know.
Turning out some good kids.
Talent. Joe asked him to take him on as a student. These two boys who were like basically the same age. He's like, he had played piano when he was younger, but he had given up because of his ballet schedule. And he was like, "Well, you play piano. Can you teach me? I want to take lessons." And somehow the two boys found time in their grueling school schedules to meet and study piano. He loved to choreograph, and in 1982, his La Création du Monde, is that how you pronounce creation in French?
Création.
I think I did that.
Oui.
Was performed by the New York City Ballet. So he's also a budding choreographer.
I mean, amazing.
The critics approved. Rare.
Very.
And it seemed likely he would be mentored through the artistic director track. That seemed to be where he was headed. When he was 16, still at SAB, he organized a group of dancers to perform at public schools, calling his friends at 6 a.m. to have a group warm up at 7 a.m.
Who is this kid? This is driven almost in a way that's like, how long can this last?
Yeah. Are you okay, honey? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, for a minute I thought you were asking me, and I'm like,
are you?
Are we taking a time out for us?
Are you okay?
I'm okay. Are you okay? We're both shitty. Okay.
Working through it. He choreographed a piece for his friends to dance to a song by Elton John. And even Balanchine liked it, even though he didn't like the music. When Joe joined the Corps at 18, his brother Daniel was already a principal dancer. Jerome Robbins cast the two brothers opposite each other in the fencing duet Arts of the Gentleman. It was fun to dance with his brother, but years later, Joe admitted he had, quote, "a secret competitive feeling with him. To get better than my big brother, I guess I felt if I could do that, I would get out from under."
Out from under.
A year and
Dark.
a half after he joined the company, when he was 19, he had what was called, quote, "some deep emotional trouble." And he left the company for 4 months. Quote, I couldn't avoid the comparison with Dan and other boys who were physically much more knit. I hadn't yet worked out who I was and why I was dancing. But when he returned, he dedicated all his considerable focus and energy to dance, and he continued his ballet outreach, coordinating the Ballet Guild's luncheons and family matinee programs.
Where do they get the energy? The kids.
Yeah, he's pushing himself really, really hard.
Yes.
According to Suki Shorer, a teacher at SAB, quote, what God gave him to dance with wasn't terrific, but he took it and became a beautiful dancer, performing with a great musical sense. His approach...
Like, thanks, Suki. That's kind of like, F you.
It's like, but I put it in because it's a reminder of just like how ridiculously exacting this art form is. And...
Well, I think, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
That there's so much that's not under your control, that no matter how hard you work, no matter what artistry you possess, the fact is, if your elevations and your pirouettes don't come naturally, they're never going to look the way that, I don't know, these choreographers assume that they should look.
Yes. I mean, the other thing that occurs to me is that he's trying to find himself in the way that you're telling the story. His heart is in connecting with people. And so all of this outreach and showing other people how to, like what dance is, and he's sort of an ambassador for what he loves the most. And
that it was such a risk for him to take those months off to really, as he said, figure out why he wanted to dance.
Very thoughtful kid.
Yeah.
Which can be hard.
And that can be hard because, again, I feel like this art form in particular, and I'm sure there are others out there too. I can't say that about theater in particular, but I'm sure there are other art forms like this. But like individuality, no.
Well, agreed, but so competitive. So your sense of self has to be unbelievably strong, and your will to do it, because, well, we all saw Black Swan.
That is a very good movie. I don't ever want to see it again, though.
Me neither, not once.
Yeah. His approach was in line with Balanchine's, and this is a quote, practicality about technique, routine, work habits, and physical health. If something needs doing or changing, do it. That's it. Just do it. Complaints and delays waste energy. So that's probably why they got along so well. Like, he was harder on himself than Balanchine could be on him.
Mm-hmm.
That was from Tony Bentley, who was his friend. And Tony also said, he was extremely intense and very introverted sometimes. You'd see him thinking and he wouldn't even see you. But he was such a self-improver, such a fighter. That's what makes this so shocking. Right?
Yeah, I'm just taking it in.
Like, what's the solution? And he eventually couldn't find a solution.
And probably recognized how exhausting it was to be him, and that wasn't going to change. Think about that. It's very, 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 very hard to be that aggressive with yourself and know that it is who you are to do that. There's no like, hey, take it easy, because it's not a choice.
But that's why it was interesting that he had this opportunity and encouragement to become a choreographer, where honestly he could have gotten soft, right? And he had such appreciation for music. It just seems like, wow, that might actually be your gift and you enjoy it. But even that wasn't enough. His brother, by the way, is the artistic director of Ballet Chicago.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Does he speak about this on any of the outlets that you found? No.
He does not.
But what I find so interesting about this is, like, He was not a major New York figure. He wasn't a star yet. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a well-known actor. But this story is a story that lives on. It's a big story. And it's a story that never left you. And I think that's what's most compelling to me about this is that there's, and as you're describing, there's something about him that is above and beyond and sort of getting your mind around who he was and his eventual actions is, I'm going to say something really fruity, so bear with me, but it's like such an incredibly intense pulling apart and examining the human condition because he has everything and probably felt like he had nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I
Yeah.
find very compelling about it.
Absolutely. And he was in a community. You mentioned how it's clear that that's what he valued by how he spent his time, like connection. And he had that. And that's also nobody was saying like, oh, if he had only reached out, it wasn't like that. It was just, what do you mean he didn't find a solution for this? But he found solutions for everything. He was such a hard worker. He was always working to make things better, and he couldn't make that better. And I said earlier that the paper said swan song. That wasn't what they said. I think they said swan dive.
Mm-hmm. Is that what made you choose the story? Because you remembered that headline?
I came across it, and again, I can't remember why I came across it, but as soon as I started to read it, I remembered it.
Visceral. There was like 16-year-old Meg, like what got under your skin?
And yeah, it's still a mystery. He left no note. And no drugs or alcohol at all. He was a health fiend who always got enough sleep, like all the things. How does he
That's
get
the one
enough
thing
sleep?
I'd want to know. Yes, let's like how get the psychic exactly. Get the seance. I just want to know how to go to bed on time and fall asleep. Joe, tell me. Well, that is a very sad story and very much in keeping with our gray mood.
I mean, at first I was a bit bummed. I'd written it. I haven't finished my next story, so it's not like I could have chosen to do that instead.
That wasn't a criticism.
Oh, no,
I'm
no,
just
no,
saying,
no.
like,
I'm just saying that I if I had had a choice, I probably would have gone with a less dark story. But now I'm feeling like it is what it is, and that's just what we got today.
Well, buckle up for what I got, Buttercup.
Okay.
New York Times headline, Wednesday, November 9th, 1988. Bush is elected by a 6-5 margin. With solid GOP base in the South, Democrats hold both houses. Now, I'm not going to talk about George H.W. Bush.
Okay.
But I just want to say one thing that he said when he was elected. Okay?
Okay.
We don't love George Bush.
Not at all.
But here's what he said. He invoked a favored theme of his campaign when he was elected in his speech. He said, when I said I want a kinder, gentler nation, I meant it and I mean it. That is possible to be a Republican president and say such a thing.
It's true. It's true.
In 1980, New York Times headline, Wednesday, November 5th, 1980. Reagan easily beats Carter. Republicans gain in Congress. D'Amato and Dodd are victors. So we're going to talk a little bit about Ronald Reagan today. And we've talked about Ronald Reagan on this podcast several times. But after the events that unfolded yesterday, I started thinking about Reagan and I wanted to get a little more savvy about this figure who has been the boogeyman in so much of what we talk about politically on this podcast. He was not the kind of guy who we would have supported at
I
all.
did not support him at the time.
Well, we were
In
sorry.
my heart. I was too young to vote, but in my heart.
Yes. I don't think that I was aware enough as a child. I mean, in 1984, yes, but when he was first elected, and there are a couple of things that come up here that you'll see why I'm talking about him and what he did. In fact, I'm going to give a spoiler. So, because I am a child, I can't resist. And Voldemort, for the purposes of this particular podcast, is going to be referred to as fuckface. Okay. So, what I have been thinking a lot about as I've watched fuckface do his thing is he's playing a role. Very much so. And I was thinking, who is he cosplaying? Who is he trying to be? And I realized this is the playbook. It's Reagan. So there's so much of what we talk about on this podcast that is like, what is the link between what we had then and what it is now, and how do we look back on it? And this is the prime example for me of we're looking at what we see as a national embarrassment and tragedy. And I was like, well, I want to put this in context. I want to see what this person's, to the best of his rotten to the core ability, what's his drag. Fuckface is in drag.
Right.
He's in Reagan drag. So here are a couple things that I learned that he did prior to his presidency. On February 5th, 1969, Reagan declared, he was the governor of California. He declared a state of emergency in response to ongoing protests and acts of violence at the University of California, Berkeley. We all know those were the student protests. Hello, we know what that's about. And he sent in the California Highway Patrol. In May 1969, those same officers clashed with protesters at the People's Park, another infamous violent encounter. A student was shot and killed.
Oh my God.
And others were injured. And the National Guard came in to Berkeley. All of this was at Reagan's behest. And on April 7th, Reagan defended his policies, saying, if it takes a bloodbath, let's get it over with.
Oh my
No
God.
more appeasement.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, me neither.
Right. So we're talking about playbook.
Right.
Now let's talk about playbook again for a second. In the primaries for his 1980 eventual election, there were debates, and Reagan pulled quite a stunt. There was going to be a one-on-one debate between him and George H.W. Bush. And it was going to be in Nashua, New Hampshire. And it was just the two of them. Well, guess what Reagan did? He invited 4 other candidates to join.
Are you allowed to do that?
No. And the moderator and which was sponsored by a newspaper, said, you can't do that. And it has something to do with like the fact how it was funded. And like, it's just, that's not okay. It's not.
This is our event, not your event.
Yes.
You don't get a +4.
Exactly. Oh, that's what it would violate federal campaign contribution laws. So guess what Reagan did? He said, fuck it, I'll pay for it myself. So he paid for this debate.
And
is this starting
Bush
to sound
showed
familiar?
up?
All of them showed up. So he does this and saying, if I'm paying for it, I can say what the rules are. At one point, he was bossing everything around so much, the moderator asked the sound technician to turn off his microphone.
Oh my God.
At which point, Reagan goes crazy and says, I'm paying for this microphone. Turn it back on. This was the turning point of the debate and the primary race. Except for Bush, all of the other candidates left. Bush remained.
Oh, that's interesting. They just left the stage.
Yes.
That is real. Okay.
And soon after they started dropping out of the primaries. The newspaper that was sponsoring it was the Telegraph in Nashua, New Hampshire. So there is a record there. So that's just the kind of guy he was. Now, I think you're starting to see a little bit of a comparison about being predatory in a debate, right? Or not being able to handle following the rules and having to set his own rules. Now, Reagan was an actor and an accomplished speaker, unlike Fuckface, but he couldn't handle not being the boss.
Right.
Same thing. So a few other little wonderful things about Reagan that I realized are echoed with our whatever he is now. We're not going to call it that. Here's some things that he liked doing that you may or may not, some of his greatest hits that you may or may not remember from the 80s. He was all about trickle-down economics.
I remember.
And he was all about cutting any kind of funding for federal programs, such as aid to families with dependent children, unemployment benefits, subsidized housing, Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. All of these he wanted gone. In 1982, the Garn, I don't know how to pronounce this, St. Germain Depository Institutions Act deregulated the savings and loan associations. Trickle-down economics, we all know where that went. Everything was favoring the rich. This was the beginning of the Great Divide that we are now seeing in full force with not only Fuckface, but Dickhead, also known as Elon Musk.
Yes. And I know that we don't have to say this, but we should probably say it at least once out loud, that trickle-down economics clearly does not work. It doesn't trickle down. It stops right there at the top.
Yes, it's
exactly where it started. It stays there.
Right. I would like to sit on this nest egg. Thank you very much. Yes.
Or buy a rocket for fun.
Shaped like a dick, which is why this is Dickhead. Another little parallel, which could not have been planned, but certainly is echoing, and I do believe that Fuckface used this when he raised his pudgy, disgusting fist in triumph. You know, there was an assassination attempt on Reagan in 1981. He survived. It galvanized the country behind him. It made him so popular. And as we look at the events of last night, of yesterday, you know, we may be asking ourselves, like, what are all of the elements that went into this? And I think that those of us, and I am certainly this person, when there was the incredibly inept, I'm not advocating anyone killing anyone. I'm just saying it was very inept because it was a child, but this shooting, we're like, oh, it was no big deal. Like, nothing really happened to him. A piece of the monitor hit his ear, whatever. No, that was, I think, where everything really turned for anyone who was on the fence. And I was reading some stuff in the New York Times today that was actually a very big moment for one of the people they profiled who was on the fence. Also, like Reagan, Fuckface filled the Supreme Court with conservatives. Reagan put on Antonin Scalia, Anthony Kennedy, and William Rehnquist.
Ew.
Yes. Other things that Reagan did not like that Fuckface is taking a page from: equal pay for men and women. When governor, he signed an act allowing for abortion in the case of rape, and then later, or I think extreme danger to the mother, and then later reported regretting it.
I was researching a story about evangelicals that I don't know I can tell because, as it turns out, they really didn't come to New York, which is really irritating because it was going to be a great story about evangelicals in the 80s. But that is one thing that I discovered. Reagan made an alliance with the evangelicals that was purely about power and mutual benefit. It wasn't about his heart or his religious leanings or anything like that.
Exactly. Like Fuckface, Reagan actually was the very first president ever to be elected who had been divorced. So yes, all a posture. Very much so. Jerry Falwell, thanks Reagan for that one. Then there's the Iran-Contra affair. And we're just going to quickly say this is about general morality and there being a private commission to say, hey, that's really fucked up. And then it amounting to nothing. But the essence of the Iran-Contra affair is that Reagan ignored Congress barring him from selling arms to Iran. He just said, fuck it.
Right.
I'm going to do my own thing.
Work around.
Yes. In 1987, the Tower Commission released a report confirming that the Reagan administration, without any Senate or Congress agreement, traded arms for hostages and sent the proceeds of the weapon sales to the Contras. So fucking corrupt and insane. And by the way, Oliver North, under the bus. And if you ever want to have a really good time watching the most uncomfortable inquiry in the history of ever, look that up on YouTube. Are you just getting depressed as I go through this?
Well, I wouldn't say depressed. I mean, I'm already in a state of, despair. But it is interesting. We never really had a Reagan reckoning the way we should have. Maybe that's what this is about. Or maybe history repeats itself. I don't know.
But I think the point that I was steering us to, you have now articulated perfectly. I think that this is the reckoning. Everything that Reagan put into motion, and we've had a few Democratic blips along the way, but this has been steamrolling within the Republican Party without veering off course all this time. Now, do I think that fuckface is capable of really having a strategy and a policy? No. But do I think that the Republican Party that is moving him around does? Yes. Absolutely.
Clearly they do.
No question. So the idea that, Reagan...
At least now we know about it. I feel like we found out a lot of stuff about Reagan after the fact or not in real time.
Well, unlike fuckface, Reagan didn't have Twitter or whatever other social media platforms where he could just vomit out every single thought that he had.
I mean, we didn't even know that he had Alzheimer's until
he died of it.
Yeah.
We did know that his son hated him. His gay son hated him. We did know that Ron Jr. was like, does anyone have a microphone? Because I have something to say, and it's not pretty.
Oh, wait, what was I saying? That if this is repeating history, at least this time, we might have a little bit more time to work with because we know it from the jump.
Do you really think that people learn from history? I feel like they don't. I think that if they learned, we wouldn't be where we are right now.
I don't know.
Well, yet again, I'm the cynic.
In our first story, we were talking about community. I do think that people are galvanizing. I do. I think that there was an enormous, I know that it wasn't enough people, but there were a fuckload of people who were galvanized around the right issues and the right way forward and at least towards optimism and against Nazis.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I agree with you fully. I guess what I meant was the people who
Reagan
voted.
walked in. He basically walked in because Carter did not have energy behind him.
Correct.
And people just gave him kind of the keys to the kingdom. I feel like there's a lot more resistance going on now.
I think that you're right. I think that they're incredibly different personalities and present incredibly differently. So looking back at Reagan, that's just what really interested me because he was so slick. He was really capable of putting a lid on whatever he was doing and squirming out. And he deployed Nancy like a beast. Whereas Melania, when you were talking about the dance, who cares? I was thinking about her stupid jacket. I was like, oh yeah, I don't care, do you? But anyway, this was my way of processing what happened. It's just trying to figure out like really what's impossible to figure out, which is what's he thinking? Like, is this really a playbook? Look at how similar it is. So I'm exploring that concept. I couldn't even begin to say it's true, but it struck me as, there were so many comparison points. So
no, it is. It's very interesting. Well, this has been a somber episode.
And I have an apology.
Which is predictable.
Yes, I have an apology. I too should have done a trigger warning. I am very sorry. Yeah, it's a somber episode, and I think that it's appropriate. A big part of what we do on this podcast is sharing our real life experiences and as friends talking it through. And if we didn't do that today, then what are we doing?
And that everything comes around again. I mean, this podcast is also about the echoes of the past and how they affect us now. And that's really what your story was about.
Yes, I stayed on mission. I stayed on topic. I every time we talk about what is the tie-in, I can't help but say to you, remember that time I said, "Oh wait, it's the 80s." And you're like, "Oh my God."
No, you said it's the 80s in New York.
In New York.
But we have a different tie-in today. Psychics.
I wish everyone could see my face right now. Meg, that was masterful. That was a master stroke. For those of you who do not know, Nancy Reagan was extremely well known for relying on astrologers and psychics to guide her every move.
And apparently the countries.
And
her husband wasn't able to string two words together.
Yes. Like that movie. Remember that movie, Dave? With Kevin Kline, where he's like, in the wing, like hooked up.
Oh God.
Like that's just what I'm envisioning. And Nancy's like, well, Dionne Warwick, my psychic friend, told me that I should sit on Mr. T's lap and say, don't do drugs.
Did she sit on Mr. T's lap?
Oh, yes. It's one of the great photos of the 80s.
What was happening?
It was
so crazy.
It was like a Christmas thing, I think, and he was dressed up as Santa. And it was a
70-year-old woman sat on his lap.
And she weighed she'd gotten herself down to her birth weight. So she was just like this little elf on the shelf of Mr. T's lap.
And
in her Adolfo red suit.
And as you were speaking about the 80s and when you're talking about Reagan and his policies and when you're talking about Nancy Reagan, I do think of ACT UP and I do think of all the resistance that happened because of their blatant disregard for people who they were not interested in.
Oh, I'm going to blow your mind even further. Do you know who Reagan was friends with?
Who?
Rock Hudson.
Oh, I did know that. I absolutely did know that. And they completely abandoned him.
Yeah. Like, really.
Just like Trump abandoned Roy Cohn.
Yeah.
Except that Rock Hudson was a lovely person.
Yes. Big difference. But same thing. Yes, I didn't talk about the AIDS crisis and Reagan because we've talked about it on this podcast many times.
And we've talked about the mental health crisis. There was so much damage done. So much.
Well, and what it boils down to is when you have leaders who do not acknowledge the humanity of their citizenry, bad things happen. And to your point, it is community that brings that back to life. So I'm not despairing about whether or not there is community and the opportunity for community action. What I was saying about people don't learn from history is those who voted that way. To try to wrap this up and have a forward-thinking, more positive note, life goes on. And
we survived the 80s.
Exactly. We continue on and, have a good night of lots of wine and ordering in a huge amount of like pad thai or something like that. And
we regroup. We regroup.
Yes. We do not wallow. And maybe that will be the making of a whole new generation.
Hear, hear.
I was about to sing The Children Are Our Future, but I spared you.
I'm actually very glad about that.